Hey, welcome back. Grab a warm drink, get comfortable, and let the volume settle nice and low. I've got 3 stories for you tonight. There's a slice of sweet revenge, a quiet little mystery that stuck with me for days, and a last one that genuinely made me sit up in bed. So get cozy, and let's ease into it. My manager laughed in my face and said if I wanted overtime pay, I could put it in writing, so I did. I worked at a mid-sized warehouse that shipped auto parts, and for 2 years I'd been the guy who stayed late whenever a truck came in wrong or a pallet count didn't match. I never got a dime extra. My manager, a man named Doug who wore sunglasses indoors, insisted that salaried floor leads didn't get overtime and that staying late was just, quote, part of being a team player. Here's the thing Doug didn't know. I wasn't salaried. When I was hired, the offer letter listed me as hourly, non-exempt, at $19 an hour. Somewhere along the way, the company started treating me like a salaried lead and paying me a flat weekly number, and I'd let it slide because the base math worked out roughly the same. But roughly the same isn't the same when you're pulling 12-hour days during peak season. So I put it in writing, like he told me to. I sent Doug a very polite email asking him to confirm, in writing, that I would not be compensated for hours worked beyond 40. I made it sound almost apologetic. And Doug, being Doug, replied within the hour with a message I will treasure forever. Correct, he wrote, floor leads are expected to work as needed with no additional overtime. Stop asking. He even put a little smiley face at the end, like he'd won something. I printed that email. Then I opened a spreadsheet. For the next 11 weeks, I did exactly what Doug asked. I stayed as needed every single time, truck at 6 in the morning. I was there. Inventory correction at 9 at night. Happy to help, Doug. And I logged every minute in a notebook I kept in my jacket, cross-referenced against the badge scanner records I could pull from the break room kiosk. Clock in, clock out, to the exact minute, printed weekly. When peak season ended, I called the State Labor Board. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just described the situation and mailed them copies. My offer letter listing me as hourly non-exempt. Doug's email confirming no overtime and 11 weeks of badge scans showing an average of 58 hours a week. The investigator who called me back actually chuckled when she read Doug's email aloud. She said in 15 years she'd rarely seen a manager put the violation in writing quite so cleanly, with a smiley face no less. The company got hit for 2 years of back overtime, not just mine. Once the audit started, it turned out 4 other floor leads had been misclassified the exact same way. All of us got checks. Mine came to a little over $19,000. One of the other guys, who'd been there longer, got almost 30. Doug did not get a check. Doug got walked to a conference room by 2 people from corporate and a woman I'd never seen before, and he did not come back to his desk. His sunglasses stayed on his monitor for about a week until someone finally boxed them up. The best part came at the all-hands meeting afterward, when a new operations director stood up and announced that from now on, all overtime would be tracked and paid, no exceptions, and that any request for compensation should be submitted, and I quote, in writing. He had no idea why half the warehouse burst out laughing. I nearly cried. I stayed another year, got properly reclassified, and finally left for a job that paid me for my time from day one. But I kept that printed email. It's framed now, sitting on the shelf in my home office, smiley face and all. Every so often when work feels thankless, I glance at it and remember the day a man told me to put it in writing, and I took him at his word. Turns out that was the smartest thing he ever told me to do. Every morning for 3 weeks, the number spray-painted on our shared fence went down by 1. My wife and I had just moved into a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of street where the loudest thing you hear is someone's sprinkler. The fence ran between our backyard and the house behind us, and on our second morning there, I noticed a number painted on the far side in flaking white. 41. I figured it was some old marking, a survey number, a leftover from when the fence was installed. But the next morning it read 40. Not repainted over exactly. More like the last digit had been carefully changed, and the morning after that, 39. I mentioned it to my wife, and she rolled her eyes and said it was probably kids. But kids don't count down consistently at the same time for weeks. I started checking it with my coffee every day, 38, 37. Always fresh, the old number just barely visible underneath like a scar. The house behind us belonged to an elderly man named Mr. Halverson. I'd waved at him twice. He always waved back with a slow, deliberate hand, and once he'd said, "Good morning, welcome," in a voice like dry leaves. I didn't know him well enough to knock on his door and ask why he was counting down on my fence, so I did the coward's thing and just watched. At 30, I couldn't take it anymore. I set my phone up in the kitchen window, angled at the fence, recording overnight. In the morning, the number read 29, and I sat at the table with my coffee going cold and scrubbed through 6 hours of footage. At 4:17 in the morning, a shape moved into frame. It was Mr. Halverson, in a bathrobe, moving slowly with a small can of paint and a brush. He crossed his yard, reached over the low part of the fence, and with enormous care changed the number. Then he stood there for a long moment with his hand flat against the wood. And then he went back inside. I felt like I'd stolen something private just by watching, but I still didn't understand it. 29 what? A countdown to what? I decided to just ask him, gently, neighbor to neighbor. I baked, or rather my wife baked, a loaf of banana bread, and I carried it around to his front door. He answered in the same bathrobe, and when I awkwardly mentioned the fence, his face didn't go guarded like I expected. It softened. He invited me in for tea, and he told me. His wife, Margaret, had passed the year before, in the spring. They'd lived in that house for 41 years. On their very first day there, before there was even furniture, they'd stood in the backyard, and Margaret had joked that they should mark the wall like prisoners counting days. Except they'd count up, one number for every happy year. They never actually did it. It was just a thing she'd said, laughing in the sunshine. After she died, he found himself unable to sleep, and one night he went out and painted 41 on the fence, one for every year they'd had. And every morning since, he'd been counting backward, walking each year in reverse, remembering it as he erased it. 29 had been the year their daughter was born. 30 had been a trip to the coast. He was, he told me, saying goodbye to their whole life together, 1 year at a time, and when he reached 1, he intended to finally let her go and try to live again. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, and we drank our tea. The morning the fence read 1, I looked out and Mr. Halverson was standing there in the early light, hand pressed to the wood. Then he painted it over, clean, no number at all. He caught me watching through the window and he gave me that same slow wave. But this time he was smiling. That afternoon I saw him planting roses, Margaret's favorite, he told me later. He'd finally reached the beginning again. For 8 years, an old woman saved the same bus seat every morning for a man who never sat in it. I drove the number 12 route across town 6 days a week, and she was my most reliable passenger. Her name was Eleanor, and she boarded at the 3rd stop at 7:12 sharp, exact enough that I could set my watch by her. Every morning she'd shuffle to the same window seat, 3rd row on the right, and sit down. But she never sat in that seat herself. She'd put her handbag on it, place her folded coat over the back, and then settle into the aisle seat beside it. If the bus filled up and someone reached for the window seat, she'd say, very politely, that it was taken. People grumbled sometimes, but she said it so kindly that they'd move along. For years, I assumed she was just one of those particular older folks who liked their space. But I got curious once and asked her, gently, why she always saved that seat. She smiled and patted the handbag and said, "That's Harold's seat. He likes the window." I never saw a Harold. In 8 years, not once did anyone sit down in that saved seat. I started to think maybe her mind wasn't what it used to be, that Harold was a husband long gone and she was keeping a place for a ghost. It was sweet and a little sad, and I decided it wasn't my business, so I just made sure nobody bothered her about it. We'd talk sometimes, on the quiet stretch past the reservoir where nobody boarded for a couple miles. She told me she and Harold had ridden the number 12 together every morning for 30 years, back when he was alive, before I ever took over the route. He'd always take the window because he liked to watch the geese on the water. She'd take the aisle. And after he passed, she just kept riding, kept saving his seat because getting on that bus and sitting alone was more than she could bear. So she pretended he was still beside her, watching the geese, and it made the ride bearable. It broke my heart a little every day. This past spring, Eleanor didn't board at the third stop. 7:12 came and went, and the seat was empty, all of it, the window and the aisle both. I told myself she'd caught a cold, but she didn't come the next day either, or the next. After a week, I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Then a young woman boarded at Eleanor's stop, maybe 30 years old, holding a small paper gift bag. She asked if I was the driver of the number 12. I said I was. She said her grandmother had passed the week before, peacefully in her sleep. Her name was Eleanor. I had to pull the bus over for a second. I told her how sorry I was, that her grandmother had been my favorite passenger for 8 years, and that I'd always wondered about the seat she saved for Harold. The young woman went very quiet. Then she said Harold wasn't her husband. Her husband's name was George. He died 40 years ago. I didn't understand. I asked who Harold was then. She reached into the gift bag and handed me an old, faded photograph. It was of a bus driver, a young man in a uniform, standing beside the number 12, grinning. On the back, in Eleanor's careful handwriting, it said, "Harold, my friend." He saved me a seat every morning after George died, so I'd never have to sit alone. Best man I ever knew. Harold had been the driver before me. He'd retired the year I started, and he'd passed away shortly after. Eleanor hadn't been saving a seat for a ghost husband. She'd been saving it for the kind driver who'd once made sure a grieving widow never rode alone, so that his kindness would keep its place on the bus long after he was gone. And she'd never once told me. I drive that route still. I keep the window seat clear. That's all 3 for tonight. Sleep well, and if you're still awake, drop a comment and tell me which story was your favorite.